It is 6 p.m. on Wednesday, June 25th. I'm going to call to order this special meeting of the Winooski City Council. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Deputy Mayor Thomas Renner.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next up is agenda review. I would like to remove council reports and city updates, given the nature of this special meeting. Is anyone opposed to that?
No, that's great.
Okay, great. Next up is public comments. Do we have any members of the public that are not here for the condemnation hearing topic? If you are on Zoom and wish to make a public comment, you can use the raise hand feature. Okay. Hearing none, we'll move to our consent agenda. We have our June 16th liquor control and city council minutes. Any concerns about the consent agenda?
No.
Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Motion by Bryn, second by Charlie. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. So we'll move on to our regular items. We have on for discussion approval, the right-of-way condemnation public hearing. So we are going to first receive an overview from legal counsel, and then we'll move into presentations and Q&A. Christian, would you like to
Yes, thank you.
kick us off? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Christian Chorba. I'm an attorney at Downs Racklin Martin in Burlington, and I'm representing the city of Winooski in this matter. So this is a municipal condemnation of land owned by Winooski Hotel Group. We've identified exactly where that land is, but very briefly, it is as you enter Winooski from Burlington over the existing bridge. It is a 0.18 acre parcel immediately between the road and I believe it's the mill building. So this land has been identified as being necessary for use as a storage and staging area for the rebuilding, the replacement of the existing Burlington-Winooski Bridge. Vermont has many different condemnation statutes. This particular one is 24 VSA 2805, which authorizes the city of Winooski to take land if it is necessary for public use and benefit. So tonight, we're going to be looking at whether the condemnation satisfies the statute. And in doing so, there are really two issues that we'll be looking at. And we have two separate panels for those different issues. The first issue is whether it is necessary to condemn the property. The second issue is the compensation that should be paid to the landowner, in this case, the Winooski Hotel Group. The municipal condemnation statute actually contemplates two stages of this whole condemnation process. So the first stage is the one we're at right now, and that's the stage before the city council, the pre-litigation stage. The second stage is if the condemnation or an aspect of it is appealed to the Vermont Superior Court. Then there is another process that must be followed by the Vermont Superior Court. So to walk through the city council stage, we have 24 VSA 2805, which again says when in the exercise of any of the powers or functions authorized by its charter or bylaws, it becomes necessary for public use and benefit to take, damage, or affect lands, and the owner refuses to release or convey the same to such municipality for a reasonable price, the mayor and aldermen of such city shall set out the necessary lands and cause the same to be surveyed. Next, they will appoint a time and place for hearing and give at least 10 days notice thereof before such hearing to the persons interested. That includes any mortgage holder. Then, at the hearing itself, which of course is scheduled for tonight, the city council, quote, shall determine the damages sustained by such interested persons. If the landowner disagrees with the compensation amount, the city council may agree to refer to the question to, quote, one or more disinterested persons whose award shall be made in writing and shall be final. In other words, it's up to the city council to determine the necessity as well as the compensation to be paid. And before the entire issue, the entire condemnation issue is appealed to the Superior Court, the compensation amount can be referred to a designated person to determine whether or not that compensation amount that the city council has determined is reasonable and appropriate. Finally, if the land is, quote, enclosed or improved, the municipality must wait at least 3 months before taking possession of it. So that's the overview of the city council's role. Again, the entire, both necessity and compensation to be paid can be appealed to the Superior Court. If that is done, then the judge will first appoint, quote, 3 disinterested commissioners who shall inquire into the necessity for locating and setting out such land and as to the amount of damages sustained by the persons interested therein. In other words, the judge will refer the issue to 3 disinterested persons, 3 neutral persons, who will again assess necessity and compensation to be paid. Those persons will hold a hearing and then submit a report to the judge, who will then, quote, accept or reject the report from those 3 disinterested commissioners, and in doing so can accept or reject in whole or in part, and can tailor their report to the exact circumstances of necessity or compensation. So it's a very thorough process, both at the city council level and then on appeal. Just very quickly, because we can certainly enter into executive session if more legal advice is required, but the questions of necessity and compensation are not actually defined by this particular statute. However, as I mentioned before, in Vermont, there are several different condemnation statutes for different situations. So just as a few examples, there is a statute that allows municipalities to take land for use in wastewater systems. That's 24 VSA 3607. There's one that allows utility companies to take land for utility projects. That's 30 VSA 110. And there's one that allows the Vermont Agency of Transportation to take land for highway projects, and that's 19 VSA 502. So in interpreting the questions of necessity and compensation to be paid, we look at definitions for those terms from those statutes, or from case law in Vermont, or even from how other states have interpreted those terms. And so necessity, one thing to keep in mind is that necessity does not mean that is the absolute only way to accomplish a goal, a public use goal. And I'll just read from one of those other statutes. This is the one for taking land for wastewater systems, which I think has it's a very comparable process. That statute says necessity means a reasonable need that considers the greatest public good and the least inconvenience and expense to the condemning party and to the property owner. And it continues, necessity shall not be measured merely by expense or convenience to the condemning party. Due consideration shall be given to the adequacy of other property and locations, to the quantity, kind, and extent of property that may be taken or rendered unfit for use by the proposed taking, to the probable term of unfitness for use of the property, to the effect of construction upon scenic and recreational values, upon home and homestead rights, and the convenience of the owner of the land, to the effect upon town grand list and revenues. The statute defining necessity in the context of the Vermont Agency of Transportation taking land is very similar to the one I just read. And then what I would say is that reviewing how necessity is defined or interpreted all over the country in the condemnation context, it's very similar. It considers multiple factors. So this is just quoting from a legal treatise that sort of serves as a review of all of these different condemnation statutes. It describes that determinations of necessity can involve many factors such as cost, environmental concerns, future development, and safety. So again, it's sort of a reasonability analysis that considers many different factors. It is not a question of whether it is the only way of accomplishing a certain goal. Meanwhile, as to compensation, again, we look to how that term and similar terms have been interpreted here in Vermont, as well as around the country. And our particular statute says that compensation must be equal to, quote, the damages sustained by, end quote, the landowner. In other words, the landowner should not suffer a financial loss due to the condemnation, but also should not enjoy a windfall due to that condemnation. And the landowner should financially be in the same position as if the condemnation never occurred. So that's just a brief overview of this process tonight. We've got necessity and we have compensation. And like I said, we have 2 separate panels for each of those issues. Each panel has a main presenter as well as a presentation. And I think with that, I will leave it to them.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction. We will move first to our presentation on the necessity of condemnation. Councilors, I'll just remind you, you're welcome to ask questions along the way.
Thanks.
Let us know if you should have Zoom share permission.
Yep, I'm all set to go. I was just,
Great. Maybe.
oh wait, sharing is not allowed.
I got you. Just hang on 2 seconds.
Good. So let me go ahead and share this. There it goes. Okay, just a little bit of a lag. All right, so I will go ahead and walk through it, and as we heard, please stop me and ask questions along the way. There's a lot of information here, so I want to make sure everybody understands as we walk through.
Sorry, before we start, could we actually maybe introduce each of our witnesses on this panel?
I'm Bob Kleinfelter with VTrans. I'm the project manager for the project in the VTrans structures section.
I'm Josh Olin from HNTB. I'm a consultant project manager working for VTrans.
Carolyn Coda, Structure Senior Manager.
Thank you.
Excellent. I'll turn this just to make sure everybody can hear. We've already kind of gone through the purpose, but really the purpose tonight is of this particular part of the presentation is to convey an overview of how the bridge would be built and some of the necessary construction phasing and access points that we need to consider and look at in order to build this bridge. It's really going to explain that need for the temporary use of the parcel in question tonight, and this is just a temporary use that we are talking about. So to get through that, I wanted to quickly go through a project overview and some of the project considerations. I believe the panel is aware of the project, so I'm not going to take too long, but if there is a question, by all means, stop me. I'm going to go through the project schedule, the phasing. We're going to talk about some comparison projects to give you some examples of how other projects have been built, and we'll have some pictures to show what that looks like. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the particular construction, access, and work areas for this project as well. So quickly starting off with the project overview, I think people have probably seen this image before. We have Burlington on the left, Winooski on the right. This is our base technical concept, a colorized version of it. And of course, the parcel that we're talking about is highlighted yellow over in the lower right-hand side of the screen. Similarly, just wanted to walk through a few renderings of what that base technical concept looks like. We've got the before picture on the left, a proposed picture on the right, or proposed rendering showing a concept of what the bridge could look like. Winooski is in the background in this. As we step through and look from the other direction, looking back into Burlington, again, highlighting that approximate parcel boundary. Again, these are renderings and images, so that boundary we see there is not perfect, but it's an example. And then again, from the side, just showing what the bridge would look like in its final condition. There are no permanent impacts to the property we're talking about through this reconstruction. And again, just a typical section of the bridge for completeness and awareness. We are looking to rebuild a 4-lane structure and significantly widen the outside of the bridge for additional bike and pedestrian access. So most of the widening that we're talking about is out there, but there's a lot to be accommodated throughout this construction as well. So maybe a little bit of a more subtle piece here. I just wanted to lay some of the groundwork for project consideration. So this is something we do on every project as we start figuring out how to construct a project. We looked at what's around the area. So there's a lot going on here, and that's a little bit intentional, honestly, just to show how congested this area is. But I'll walk through quickly what these are. The purple buildings, those are all historic buildings. So they're subject to 106 process, and really kind of relates back to not being able to touch them in any way. And in fact, we have to actually monitor them for vibrations in some cases throughout construction. So very sensitive resources, can't touch them, need to stay away from them. Looking to the left of the bridge up here, downstream in red, we have the dam, the Burlington Electric Dam. That itself is a physical obstruction to us getting into the river and doing construction. Upstream of the bridge in the lower right-hand side, we have the natural falls of the river. Also an obstruction for getting anything like a barge in. We can't take a barge over those falls. We can't take it upstream from the dam. So we're kind of locked into this project site from water access. There's a lot of utilities throughout there. We've tried to trace a few of those onto this graphic for awareness. And then probably one of the bigger things is just the traffic out there. Right? 20 to 25,000 vehicles a day, anywhere from say 500 to 1,000 plus pedestrians and bicyclists out there as well. There's just a lot of moving pieces happening in a very narrow area, very congested area that need to be considered. And traffic, as everybody's aware, has been a high priority for us to consider in terms of how we're going to impact the surrounding communities. So construction will have an impact, we know that, but it's a matter of how do we contend with that? How long are the different delays in place? Should we consider closures? Should we consider partial closures? So there's been a lot of back and forth in trying to figure out how this project affects the users, not just the local people right at the bridge, but you can see all these different maps looking at different congestion points around the entire community. So this isn't just what's happening at the project site. It has a profound regional effect on traffic as well. So kind of boiling that all down, I mentioned we're locked into this project site in order to access the river and actually get out there and build things like the supports for this bridge and take down the old bridge. So there's really 3 different access points to consider, highlighted in yellow up there. It's the 3 quadrants of the bridge itself, the likely scenarios that we're going to be talking about tonight a little bit further. So with that, I wanted to talk about the overall project schedule and phasing, and this is where we start getting into some of the nuances, so please stop and ask questions. These first 2 slides that I'm going to go through are just going to be pretty high level, and then we're going to actually talk through the actual sequential stepping of how we envision this project being built. So quickly with the construction schedule, really what I want to highlight is this is an approximate 3-year construction process. We believe that boots on the ground construction, active construction will start happening sometime in the middle to late 27. Right, so the contract is going to be let sometime in 26, but there's going to be some preparation time, some final design before they're out there actively constructing. So construction will probably start in the middle to late 27 and last all the way until the middle of about 2030. There's 3 distinct traffic phases that are going to happen throughout that process on the bridge. And I'll show those on the next slide here as well. So starting right off for about that first year of construction, the existing structure is going to be in place. It's going to continue to carry 4 lanes of traffic. Once we get to a point in construction where we've built a significant portion of that structure, we are going to have to cut the existing bridge down to 2 lanes of traffic and continue building. That's going to be an approximate 4 to 6 month time frame, in which case we only have 2 lanes of northbound traffic crossing the bridge, plus bikes and pedestrians, which are going to be maintained across the site at all times. Once enough construction passes along, we are going to open that project back up, or that bridge back up to 3 lanes of traffic, with the southbound lane being dedicated to Riverside. That'll be in place for an approximate 1-year period, at which point we're going to fully open up the bridge and it'll be complete again in that mid-2030 range. So that's the basic, very high level schedule and traffic, but really what I want to do is kind of walk through what this looks like in plan view. And I've got 8 or 9 steps to walk through to really show how this sequentially gets built and what the different access and uses look like, because that's what we're talking about tonight is why do we need this property. So this is going to be the same plan view we're going to see on the next several slides, and I'll just take a minute here to talk about the color coding as it relates to each of the images. So obviously right in the middle we have the bridge. The brown is what we're kind of talking about where traffic is going to be. The different gray areas that you see there, those are our access points. So those are going to be roadways that construction vehicles are going to be coming in and out of in order to get into the river to build the bridge. And those surrounding orangish, pinkish colors, depending on which screen you're looking at, those are going to be our active construction areas, whether it's active construction or staging and laydown areas for materials and equipment. And I'll show some pictures of those later to help explain. So starting right off here, this is just the base condition. Traffic's in its existing condition, and the contractor in this hypothetical scenario has access to all three quadrants of the bridge for construction. And this is just showing a hypothetical laydown of how the contractor would use the site. So we'd have some laydown area over in the Winooski Falls Park up in the upper right, and the other two pieces would be their access into the river for initial construction. The first step they're going to do is actually start putting in the supports of the bridge. So those are clouded red here for everybody's kind of benefit, just to see them come out. That's why these areas are hatched. These are areas of active construction where permanent work is going to go. They can't be used for dump trucks driving through, cranes, hauling material. There's actively something being built there, so they don't have access. Once those supports are up in place, that's when the contractor will start putting the girders up on top of those supports. And this is when that phasing starts to drop from 4 lanes on the bridge down to 2. So this again is going to be a very active phase where we have cranes coming in and out of the site to lift those girders up into place. Girder delivery is going to be a major piece as well, and we'll show what that looks like later. But you can imagine 100 to 150 foot long steel piece being delivered through the city and having to be driven out into the river someplace to be picked up by a crane and put into place. So again, a lot of the site's going to be taken up with active construction equipment, with cranes, laborers. Eventually, we're going to talk about getting in there with concrete for the deck as well. So it's going to be a lot of equipment, a lot of pieces moving around in a very small area. Once that area is built and finished off with the deck in place, we're going to put traffic over there. We kind of talked about that on those previous slides, and the contractor's more or less going to flip their operations to the opposite side of the bridge. Right now they have a new bridge in way. They can't really access the opposite side for demolition, so their access point needs to change. But they now need a new place to store all their materials, all their tools, all their equipment, which is what the other side of the bridge is now going to be used for. So the access and material storage flip during the phases. So you can see some new access points coming down in the river for demolition purposes. And you can also see some red clouded areas showing where the rest of the abutments are being built for the permanent structure as well. So again, that side of the river is all about construction. The other side is all about storage in this phase. As the project progresses and the bridge is out of the way, the next round of steel girders goes up. You can see the introduction of a new access road onto Main Street. Again, 100 to 150 foot long steel girders need a very straight path to be able to be delivered. So we need to have some access onto the roadway here. This won't be a permanent thing. That's going to be daily trucks going in and out every 15 minutes, but there will need to be an access point onto that street. As the project progresses and the rest of the bridge is built, we're going to return those traffic conditions. The access starts to be pulled back, and we start putting in large stone fill for scour protection, and we start doing a lot of site cleanup in this phase. The other thing that might still happen in this phase is the final touches of the path reconstruction, where the contractor was using that as access previously, so it's that final pedestrian path under the bridge as well. And once we get through all that, the project is completed. So I know I kind of went through that a little bit fast. I'll pause and see if there's any questions on any of those slides before I get into some comparison projects to really show what this all means.
No questions.
Okay. So let's talk about a couple of comparison projects, because I talked a lot about staging and access and materials, but I really wanted to showcase what that looks like a little bit here. So I've got 2 examples, one down in Hartford, Vermont. So I'll start with that one here. This one actually just wrapped up construction really in the past couple of weeks. They're going through the punch list. This is a view of it actively in construction, so it's built off alignments. It does have roadways sandwiching each end of the bridge, which is a little similar to what we have out here, but a lot less congestion in terms of buildings around it, the magnitude of utilities, traffic is a lot lower. So there's a lot of dissimilarities with this bridge as well. But I wanted to talk about the main access points and how they were used. So you can see the same orange highlights up there on screen. There's 3 different orange areas. The biggest one at the southern end of this screen is about 45,000 square feet, and I'll try to refer back to that a couple times, but it's a reasonable size, but you'll see quickly in these next couple images that it can get quite congested quickly with the amount of equipment that's needed. That was the contractor's primary access. Partially goes under the new bridge and partially goes under the old bridge as well. On the north end, there's 2 smaller areas that were necessary for direct access for the abutments and the piers, not so much for staging and laydown. You can actually see they're kind of on a large hillside there, river slope. So let's talk about what this looks like. This is that southern end of the bridge, looking at that maintenance yard and that 45,000 square foot area. It's a little bit of a tough angle, but they completely blocked off one corner. Roughly 18,000 square feet of that space was used purely for staging of tools, materials being delivered, contractor facilities such as porta potties, water stations, tents for cooling. This is kind of what it looks like here. So you can see large tool sheds in the background. You can see some, in this case, some geofoam blocks in the front, that porta potty, a lot of timber off to the side for form work, temporary works. In the background, there's welding stations for the different piles. There's just a lot going on. So 18,000 square feet of that 45,000 was taken up by just tools and available materials. This is looking at it a little bit from the other direction. So this is standing on the existing bridge looking back at that space. So it's a bit tough to see, but often kind of the background on the left there, that's that same storage area that we were talking about, kind of behind the cranes. So you can see the rest of that space, the rest of that 45,000 square feet was taken up with a couple cranes, an excavator, some slurry machines in the background. There's just a lot of other things that are happening on site that use that and need to get in and out in order to actually have the different equipment come in, the laborers come in, and the materials from that site and elsewhere be delivered. So it's not something that you can just jam pack full of equipment. It needs to be pretty open for the day-to-day operations to allow the construction to happen. I mentioned long girders. So in this case, you can see a truck backing down a hill with a girder on the bed. That girder is 120 feet long, which is pretty similar to what we're talking about here in Burlington, Winooski. You can see it's very long, very straight, and I can tell you, because I took an entire video of this, it probably took them 5 to 10 minutes of turning and steering and backing down that hill in order to actually get it into the right place for those cranes to pick it, put it in place. So we do need very long straightaways in order to actually get these girders in place. Again, in the background, out in the water, you can see a couple cranes. Off to the side, you can see a bulldozer off to the side in the foreground, and in the background, you can see some additional staging and equipment as well. Oops, sorry, I pushed the wrong button. And then going forward here, getting into the deck casting operation. So this is, I mentioned some of that access area actually extends underneath the bridge. That's what we're looking at here as well. You can kind of see it a little bit in the background with the legs spread out of the truck. That's a pump truck for concrete. So it needs a significant amount of room to both drive into, but then spread out and have the ability to actually pump concrete up onto the deck. So you have concrete trucks delivering into that equipment. You have additional inspection equipment off to the side for the people making sure the concrete quality is good. And then up top, you have all the other laborers needing to access the area to actually strike off the deck while it's still fresh before it cures and hardens. So again, just a lot of equipment, very small space. But I wanted to provide this for examples of what the construction looks like and why we need this space. I'll also go through one other project up in Madawaska, Maine. This one happens to be an international bridge, so there's some nuances with the staging areas. But you can see similarly some different orange color-coded areas. The US is kind of on the bottom right side and Canada is up on the upper left. Simply because of some of the international issues, we more or less had to double up on the space available just because of the labor and tax laws and things like that. So we had to kind of separate the workforce and have a little bit more space here. So I'm going to focus on one of the areas and talk about that. And it's going to be the one in the lower right, or the two in the lower right, really. The 90,000 square foot area and the 15,000 square foot area right above it. So we'll kind of walk through those and what those looked like as the construction went on. So this is looking at the 90,000 square foot area. It's a little bit tough to see because it's snowing, so some things are a bit foggy. But over on the left there, you've got a crane kind of extending up into the image. That was being used to construct one of the abutments that you can see sticking way up out of the ground. With that, there was a lot of equipment being delivered to actually get sheet piling into the ground, those kind of metal flat pieces that they drive in and hold back the earth during construction so you can get a big excavation area and actually put your abutment into the ground. That was all happening in there. And then off to the right, you can see some red boxes. Those are generally speaking tool sheds. There's some porta potty facilities over there again for just the laborers' needs. And then a lot of material delivery in the middle of the page as well, or the middle of the image as well. And again, this is a 90,000 square foot area. Getting through it, again, looking at access roads, you can see an access road being cut down the embankment in this case because it's very tall, a little bit different than what we have out here. But you can see it also doubled as essentially a parking area for laborers. They need to be able to access the site as well. We need to find out where they're going to be able to get to the site easily. In this case, this was also used for some of that steel delivery, but unfortunately they had to kind of pick the girders multiple times. So the long truck backed down that access road, but there was a crane nearby to essentially lift it off that truck over onto the trestle and then kind of hopscotch move it along. So it was pretty inefficient in this case. You can see here one of the girders being lifted up into place. Took multiple cranes to get these up there. Again, just a lot of area, a lot of equipment out there needing to have that space. And then again, another view of just a deck pour happening. So you can see again that concrete pump truck that's blue in this case in the bottom right of the picture. And there's actually two concrete trucks lined up there as well, trying to get concrete up to the deck and in place. So concrete trucks in this type of scenario are coming every 30 to 45 minutes just to unload and let the concrete remain fresh as you continue to add more and more concrete in place. So it's a lot of equipment, a lot of materials, a lot of inspectors, and a lot of laborers up top, making sure this is all running smooth and you don't have to take material out of the way if it's inadvertently bad or cured improperly. So those are two examples. We've talked to the construction areas. I wanted to talk a little bit more now about our site. I wanted to go back to this and kind of really underscore some of the areas we're looking at. So here's the areas we have. I kind of gave you the area 1, 2, 3 before. I didn't give you the numbers. So area 1 is 13,000 square feet. 2 is 16,000 square feet. And 3, the one that we're mostly talking about tonight, is 21,000. So kind of thinking back to some of those numbers, the Hartford job, the largest area was 45,000 square feet, but about 18 of it was taken up by just equipment, just tool sheds, material deliveries, etc. That other one up in Madawaska, that had a larger area of about 90,000 square feet, and that acted as most of the staging for the project as it was. Again, much larger projects and different issues going on there, but it's an example. Here, if you add all those up, I believe we are at about 40,000 square feet. Just want to, no, 50. 50. There's my math. About 50,000 square feet total. So just, it's a little bit over that larger area in Hartford, right? 50,000 compared to 45,000. But in this case, it's split up in 3 completely separate areas. So we saw a lot of equipment needing to occupy similar spaces for different operations to happen. Multiple cranes to get a girder in place, concrete trucks and pump trucks needing to be in the same place with inspectors. Here we're split up into 3 areas as it is. And one of those areas is going to be entirely taken up simply with tool sheds, etc. So we're kind of down to 2 areas for access. So I wanted to talk through how we envision seeing some of these areas being used. Starting right off down here on Mill Street. This one's a pretty small area for those that are familiar with it over there by the mill. We're basically going to be taking part of the parking lot and that green space between Mill Street and the parking area to be able to construct the project. However, due to the steep grades coming down Mill Street and over into the river, it's not a great access point for material deliveries. And we saw how long those girders are. It's not a really good access point to try to back a truck down a kind of a twisting hillside and get into the river to actually put those girders in place. So we predominantly see this area being mostly used for more labor access, smaller equipment, maybe some concrete trucks, maybe some dump trucks, things that can maneuver on a little bit more of a tight area, not so much things like girder deliveries or larger equipment like that. It's also going to be used for obviously constructing one of the abutments in the Burlington side, and also probably be used for some minor staging areas of equipment, tool sheds, etc. I do believe with the 3 different spaces, they will probably have different tool storage at different locations to reduce downtime overall, so contractors aren't having to walk the entire project site to go grab a hammer and come all the way back around, for example. The next one is up in the Winooski Falls Park area. This is the 16,000 square foot area. Again, with it being on the opposite side of the bridge, this one's going to have a kind of a dual function. Initially, it's primarily going to be a storage area, someplace for a tool shed, maybe a field office, different material deliveries that can be put there as well. And then eventually, as construction progresses, this will become an access point, which is why we see the gray shaded area coming down the driveway entrance there. This will serve as a direct access point with equipment coming in and out, laborers coming in and out, and construction progressing through this area. So really no access for those first 2 phases, but a lot of access for the remainder. This area also has some general shortcomings as well, which are listed up here, just due to the driveway and the narrow building, or the buildings pressed against each other and they're being historic. Really, you can't get trucks over about 40 feet through here, which is why we talked about needing to kind of cut through the road for some of those girder deliveries in that second phase. And really the equipment maximum width coming through this area is about 12 feet, which when you start talking about excavators and cranes, they come on large oversized equipment trucks. And then, of course, the area that we wanted to talk about mostly tonight is this area here in the northeast corner, the 21,000 square foot area. So we've kind of zoomed in on it a little bit. Really, there's no access limitations coming through here. It's a pretty good shot, pretty straight shot into the river in terms of actually being able to access it with girders, other material equipment such as concrete trucks, pump trucks, etc. Really is a sufficient area to get a lot of the project built. This would be primarily used as site access, but in the later stages of construction could also be used for staging and laydown for that equipment that needs to essentially be now out of the way for the second phase of work. So we see large equipment being delivered here, storage of materials in that second phase, and perhaps some concrete delivery coming through here as well. But of course, I also wanted to show kind of the what if scenario. What would it look like if we don't have access to the hotel parcel? So if we don't have access, that 21,000 square foot area gets shrunk down to 13,000 square feet. So about a third-ish of it comes off. This is what the access would have to look like. It would have to wrap around that building and get a little bit tighter to the Champlain mill and be right up against it for the most part, which really cuts down all the rest of your access or staging area to a very small area next to it. We would still need to use this as the predominant access area for a lot of things in the river. It's just that more equipment would have to be stored off-site, across the road. There's a lot more back and forth. And just to kind of help quantify it a little bit, I've got some numbers here at the bottom of the screen that are rough estimates. We didn't drill into these in great detail, but they're estimates. We believe that if we don't have access to this project, this particular parcel for staging laydown access, we do think the overall project would be extended roughly 6 months. That's simply from contractors going in and out of different areas, having to go off-site to get equipment, having to go off-site for tools, having to just a lot more back and forth with other areas that we haven't yet considered. And this is all under the pretense of using the exact same solution and exact same construction methodology. That would likely result in the bridge costing roughly 15% greater, and that's just the bridge itself. And that's simply due to all that downtime of having people have to go back and forth to get equipment as well. But then I mentioned early on, this isn't just impacts to the project site, there's impacts to the greater community as well. And that's what we call user costs. And I don't know if, have you all heard of user costs before in other projects? Okay. So it's those indirect costs to just the traveling public that we see. So with an extension of roughly 6 months in the traffic congestion, the magnitude of traffic, we're looking at anywhere from, say, 8 to 15 million in rough dollars of impacts to users. And that's just the daily traveler. That doesn't quantify business impacts or anything else as well. And so with that, I'm going to pause here and see what we have for questions
I was wondering if you can speak at all to kind of worker safety, especially comparing the, like, if you had access versus if you don't.
Start here. So for worker safety, I mentioned the different areas are going to be used differently by the contractor, and obviously they're going to be the best for safety of their crew. If we don't have that area, I see the contractor and the laborers having to go off-site more frequently. Maybe that's by foot, maybe that's by car, or they're crossing the road much more frequently as well. And it's something we try to avoid a lot of cases. We've got this access area 2 and access area 3 on opposite sides of a very busy road in a work zone, driver distraction, all that type of thing. If the majority of their equipment's now over in area 2, as opposed to maybe hauling it across one day or 1 week to be able to have access to the equipment they need for the construction they're working on, they're going to be cutting across that road more frequently, which is not safe for the workers and not safe for the traveling public as well in terms of unexpected impacts.
And a clarifying question, the timeline is considered seasonal, so construction will close down during the winter months?
Somewhat. So there are certain activities we do allow during the winter, especially bridge demolition. That's not something we restrict, and there's going to be some other pieces throughout there too. Setting the steel girders we usually allow to happen over the winter because they're not affected by the temperatures. Things like concrete placement though, where you're mixing water that can freeze, that's something we usually seasonally we tell the contractor they cannot do.
Any other questions from council?
Actually, going off of that a little bit more,
Mhm.
just thinking about the seasonal aspect, like snow storage and stuff like that, for getting access to those spaces.
So usually the contractor is required to clear their own work areas of snow. So those particular areas be by the contractor. The road itself, I don't know that we've figured that part out, if it's going to be the city or the contractor in this case. But we still have to kind of clear the snow and make sure we have a place for it. I'm assuming a lot of it will have to be hauled off site.
Okay.
We're also open to questions from members of the public. Again, if you're on Zoom, you can use the chat or raise hand feature if you did want to speak. Okay. Hearing no other questions, I think, are we ready to close this, the presentation on necessity to condemn?
I would actually just ask, we have, Robert Kleinfelter here, maybe to just discuss the involvement of V-Trans in this and a little more explanation as to why Winooski itself is the condemning authority rather than some other authority doing the condemning.
Sure. So this bridge is mutually owned by Winooski and Burlington. The state does not have any ownership in the bridge itself. It is entirely owned by the municipality. This is the bridge is on a class 1 town highway, so it is town highway right of way. It is not state highway right of way. So the towns are the controlling entity here. This project is part of the V-Trans Town Highway Bridge program, where V-Trans acts on behalf of municipalities just due to the magnitude of these projects and many municipalities just not having the available resources to manage them themselves. So the specific roles and responsibilities were spelled out in detail in the finance and maintenance agreement, which, as you recall, that was fairly detailed and we went through a while back. But as it comes down to the property acquisition piece, that is covered in attachment E of the finance and maintenance agreement. But essentially, V-Trans role as part of the agreement is to provide technical assistance to the municipality with property acquisition, provided that lands or rights can be acquired by agreement at fair market value, and with the understanding, if condemnation is necessary, that the municipality must be the condemning authority as the owner. If this were a state highway bridge or state highway, it would be different, where V-Trans would be have the authority to condemn, but in this case, V-Trans is just acting on behalf of the city to assist from a technical standpoint. And the city holds the authority as the owner for condemnation.
And clarifying question, so Area 1 is on the Burlington side, and who owns that property?
So that one is partially, I think it's partially on Burlington property, but the vast majority of it is over on the Chase Mill property.
Okay, and there's no questions about condemnation for that side?
We're not there yet.
Okay.
We are still working with those property owners.
Okay.
We have questions that we've asked that property owner, and he has not responded back to us yet, but we're not there yet.
Okay. And maximum available space would be 13,000?
In that particular area, yes.
Okay.
And those are all rough numbers.
Yes.
Mike, yeah.
Sorry.
And then one other question for you, Bob, is the time frame of this. You know, we've noticed that this condemnation of this particular parcel would last until July 1 of 2030, and that, you know, this condemnation would be immediate. Could you speak to that timeline and the need for an immediate condemnation?
Yeah, I think for any acquisition on this project, we're looking to, we need to secure the necessary right-of-way in order to advance the project to construction. If we do not have right-of-way secured, we will not get permission to get construction funding obligated by federal highway. So part of that is, and as it currently stands, is you know, open space. So I think part of the acquisition considered use from the current period through when we will no longer need it, which is, as you mentioned, July 2030.
So it's theoretically, it'd be like a 5-year temporary period.
Yeah, I believe Rosa could probably speak to it. I believe 6 years was actually considered in the valuation, because at the time that was over a year ago. So, but it would essentially be about 5 years from now. Yeah, correct. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, shall we move on to the presentation on the issue of compensation?
Yes.
Who will we have presenting for that? Welcome. If you could please introduce
Sure.
yourself for the record.
My name's Luke Martin, commercial real estate appraiser in the state of Vermont.
And then we also have 3 other witnesses. Luke will be doing, will be taking the lead on the presentation, but then we have 3 other witnesses, and those are Rosa Benoit, Revi Venkataraman, and Trey Polk. And I think they could also introduce themselves. They're appearing remotely.
Hi, my name is Rosa Benoit. I'm the right-of-way appraisal chief with the Agency of Transportation, and I reviewed the property appraisal.
Welcome.
My name is Trey Polk. I'm the right-of-way acquisitions manager for V-Trans. And I have no prepared testimony, but I'm available for if I'm needed to clarify anything.
All right, welcome.
Hi, I'm Ravi Venkataraman, Director of City Planning for the City of Winooski.
Hi, Revi.
So we'll just take a moment to pull up the presentation, which is Luke's appraisal report.
1 minute stretch break. Did I get this?
think a Zoom link maybe needs to be sent to Luke's email so he can log on. Do we have the ability to do that?
All right, thanks. I don't know. I don't know if it's my computer. Yeah.
It should actually go through payroll folder. No. Paul, can you send that again, please? There you go.
Join his panels. Just react to those little pop-ups.
Should be all set.
All right. All right. Am I not sure?
Green button down the bottom middle.
Sorry. Okay. So I was hired in I think it was like September 2023 to do an appraisal of this property. I'm going to refer to it as the subject property. I am a commercial real estate appraiser. I've been doing commercial appraisal work. I started in 2012. I got my appraisal license in 2015. And I became a designated member of the Appraisal Institute in 2019. Our company covers the entire state of Vermont. We do only commercial appraisal work, but we do all types of commercial properties. And although we do cover the whole state, we end up doing a lot of work in Chittenden County and Washington County. Those are kind of the two areas that we're working in most often. So a lot of experience doing commercial appraisal work in this market area. Josh had reached out to me and discussed this project with me and made it clear that they needed an appraisal. They hired us to do that, and the first step in the appraisal process was to do a site inspection. I did that on October 3rd, 2023. I was accompanied by my trainee, who's my sister, Carly. She was working on it with me, but I did most of the work here, and I take full responsibility for this appraisal report. So there's a lot in here. I'm going to try to go through it relatively quickly, but obviously happy to answer questions as we need. But this is what I do. Like, spend 3 hours talking about it, and I don't think anyone wants that. So this is the cover letter. This goes to the client, and it kind of summarizes the appraisal. You can see right there in bold, that's the final value that I concluded, $370,000 as a market value for this property. Table of contents. Then we have a summary of the appraisal. And I'm going to go over, how I came to that $370,000 number. But that's just a brief summary of some of the findings in the report. And we know it's the 0.18 acre site. I have address for Winooski Falls Way. Josh did a great job of kind of identifying which lot we're talking about. These are some photos taken during the inspection. Just sit through those pretty quick.
think we all are aware of where this property is located, and obviously the frontage on Main Street. This next session is really just to identify our client intended users. Most of it's a pretty boilerplate stuff. I will say that per the client's request, and we appraise the property as a fee simple interest, which means we're not looking at any leases or any other property and ownership interest in the property. It would be assuming that someone paying the market value would be taking complete ownership of the property with no leases or any kind of obstructions. The one exception to that is this extraordinary assumption that I wanted to point out, and that was a request from the client, and it's that the site does have a contamination issue, and the extraordinary assumption is that the remediation cost would not be the burden of a potential buyer. So in the appraisal, I'm always talking about a potential buyer. That $370,000 would consider that the responsibility of cleaning the site would not be part of, what a buyer is taking on. That would be, and I think there was some liability potentially for the city to take on that remediation. So I want to point that out. There were no other extraordinary assumptions or hypothetical conditions. Some examples of that might be, if there was, a client might ask me, can you appraise this property assuming that this is a fully permitted site, or that there is a building here? I was not asked to do that. I didn't do that. I'm just appraising the as-is land with no other assumptions. The next section, I'm just going to kind of zip through. This is just it's just sort of some analysis of the market in general, Chittenden County, some focus on Winooski, and also the state as well. But I'm going to try to get through that to get to sort of the nitty-gritty of the valuation. Some maps. I think we know where this property is. This is just a description of the property. This stems from the inspection and also research looking at maps and the different resources that we had available to us. 0.18 acres. Owner is the Winooski Hotel Group. They purchased it in 2014. That purchase price was $600,000. I believe at that time there were some Act 250 permits that were still available, but those have expired, certainly by the time we did this appraisal assignment. And this is just some more description about the site in general. We know it's got frontage on Main Street. There's really good traffic. 31,300. That's a really high visibility location. So for commercial property, that's a significant benefit. If you're, wanting to do a restaurant or some commercial use, having all that traffic can really increase your property value. And this just is discussing the environmental issue that we already talked about, and we are assuming is not going to be impacted for a buyer. There's another look at the site. Flood map. Based on this, it looks like it's outside the flood zone. And there is the state's A&R map, and that little yellow dot is that indication of that contamination. I want to touch quickly on the zoning. It's downtown core zoning district. There's a lot of potential commercial uses that are allowed in that district. And we know that the owners of the property have for some time been interested in developing the site for a hotel. As of the appraisal date, I was told by the planning and zoning manager that they had not been able to get approvals, and that was due to a lack of available parking. And from what I'm told, that still is the case. So there's just, again, no active approvals or permits for the site. This is the assessed value. The city has it assessed for $432,500.
I'll just point out, assessed values, assessors have a different process than appraisers. Assessed values are developed kind of on a large scale for a whole community. And when we do an appraisal, we're focused on one property, and we have a totally different process. So I don't put a ton of stock when I'm doing an appraisal on what the assessed value is, other than what the taxes are and if that is going to impact the property. So I just point that out, that the assessed value doesn't always indicate a market value. Next section I want to focus on is highest and best use. This is an appraisal concept, and it's really focusing on what's the maximally productive use of the site or of a building if there's a building on the site. So there's 4 things we look at: what's physically possible, what's legally permissible, what's financially feasible, and then what's maximally productive for the site. A lot of potential uses are physically possible, legally permissible, perhaps, but not as many that might be financially feasible. Just looking at the market right now, what we're seeing mostly for development, when there is development, is housing. Construction costs have gone up a lot in the last couple of years, and it's really hampering the profit potential for new development. I've talked to a lot of developers in the area who are kind of pressing pause on projects, scaling projects back, and just kind of waiting to see if there is potential to, cut some construction costs or find better ways to turn a profit on these development projects. But when I am seeing development, it's usually primarily motivated by apartment housing or condos, that sort of thing. So looking at what we've seen for other lots, the most likely highest and best use for this would probably be a buyer motivated to develop some type of housing, most likely apartments given the small size of the site. But that also doesn't really take advantage of the location on Main Street with that high visibility. So probably really the most likely use would be some sort of mixed use where you've got first floor commercial space, maybe restaurants or a couple of retail units, something like that, and then apartments above. And when we get to the comparable sales, a lot of those were developed primarily either with apartments or mixed use properties that are going to have similar utility. I did also put some consideration into the hotel, potential for a hotel. There's certainly been some recent development of hotels in Chittenden County. There's been, over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of hotel development in Burlington. We know Doug Nettie is building over on Abenaki Way, a new hotel. So that was certainly something I considered as well. However, the lack of parking is obviously a significant issue for that. We know that the city has not given them approvals for that because of the lack of parking. But also I'll just point out that for hotel development, there has been a lot of added rooms, a lot of lodging rooms, and we've got more coming with the City Place building. It's going to be over 150 rooms, and the Abenaki Way property is going to be, I think, 125 rooms, something like that. So there's a lot of added supply, and what I've talked to a couple other developers and things about hotels as well, and they're kind of saying that, the market might be kind of reaching equilibrium, and there might not be as much profit going forward for that type of development. So with all those considerations, I concluded the highest and best use most likely is going to be a mixed-use commercial property. Okay, so let's get into valuation. How do we value this thing? As appraisers, we have 3 approaches to value. We've got the cost approach, the sales comparison approach, and then the income approach. Cost approach is based on value of the land and then value of the improvements. And it's really what would it cost to replace an existing building? So it's not really a relevant approach to value when you're talking about vacant land and there are no buildings. So we're not going to use the cost approach. Next approach, sales comparison approach. That's really based on the principle of substitution. A buyer is not going to pay more for one property than they can buy another property for. So it's really looking at what sales of similar properties offering similar utility, what buyers are willing to pay for those properties. And that's really the best guide to value for vacant land.
almost always you're going to see an appraisal for land, and it's going to be based on a sales comparison approach. The last approach that we use as appraisers is an income approach. And that's really looking at a property from an investment standpoint. If you're an investor, you're going to buy the property, how much income can you generate from it? And it's really only applicable for land if you've got like a long-term land lease, which we do see sometimes. But if not having that, and there just being so few commercial lots that have land leases, it's really not a very reliable guide to value in this instance. So I only relied on the sales comparison approach, and that's going to be typical for most appraisals of vacant commercial land. And so I'll go through the sales comparison approach with you. I have 7 comparable sales in here. Comparable number 1 is a sale of a 0.3 acre lot that's sold in Winooski. It's on Main Street. It's not on the oval, but it's pretty close to downtown. And it was purchased for housing development. The next 2 sales I have are both in Essex Junction, right near the Five Corners intersection. Both were purchased to be developed with mixed-use commercial development, mostly apartments and a little bit of commercial space. I thought these were a really good guide to what a buyer might pay for this site, given the similarities in location. They're in a downtown setting, they're small lots. The developer was going to have to develop pretty much the entire site for the building. And I think that these 2 lots offer really similar utility to the subject property. So that's comparable number 2, and this is comparable number 3. 2 similar lots, both sold in Essex. Comparable number 4 is outside of Chittenden County. It's the one sale I used outside of Chittenden County. It's in Montpelier. The main reason I use this one is it is a downtown commercial lot in a fully developed type of neighborhood where you're not going to have a lot of land available, and it's right around the same size as the subject. And that's really why I included this one, just to have one that's in the same size, because there's very few commercial land sales that are that small. Really, when you have a parcel that small, it's usually in a downtown setting and it's already developed, because that's where, commercial development is in those downtowns.
Can I ask a quick
Yeah.
clarifying question? Just looking at these, I see there's sale price and then there's sale price / acre. I was just wondering if you could explain the difference.
Yeah,
between
I was going to get to that, and I will do that now. So the price per acre is exactly what it sounds like. It's the sale price divided by the acreage. And that's a unit of comparison, and that's when I get to the adjustment grid in a second, I'm going to show you that that's the unit of comparison that I use to compare all the properties.
Okay.
And that really evens the playing field in terms of differences in size, right? So like comparable number 3 is 0.55 acres. It's sold for $775,000, but it's more than double the size of the subject. Even though we're still talking about a really small lot in terms of commercial land, but that when you start talking about price per acre, you can really kind of even that out.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Yeah. Comparable number 5 and comparable number 7 are pretty similar, and I'll just talk about those real quick. Both are sales in the kind of the new downtown center for South Burlington, and those are 2 of the more recent sales that I had available, and I felt like they gave good additional guide to the market for some commercial vacant land that has development potential. And then I have comparable number 6, which is an older sale, but I wanted another sale that was in Winooski, showing, the demand for land that could be developed, in this case, redeveloped. Redeveloped as in it already had a building on it. That building was torn down to redevelop the site. So really, we're talking about what's the value of the land there. And I just wanted another example of a sale in Winooski. And this is comparable number 7, which is very similar to number 5. And I already kind of mentioned that one. And then this is the beastly adjustment table, which is probably hard to see. Let's see if I can zoom in somewhere.
little bit better, maybe? Well, I'm not gonna go through every adjustment that I made because that could take a while and I could talk about it for a long time. And sure, I'll bore you all to tears. But I'll just kind of go over this somewhat briefly. With the adjustment table, this is where we're adjusting different characteristics to be similar to the subject. You're always adjusting the comparable sales to try to make them as, a similar analysis to the subject. So we have adjustments for, and again, I was going to mention that. So the price per acre that you mentioned, that's how we're looking at it. So we're looking at price per acre for all 7 of these comparable sales. I made some adjustments for market conditions. That would be time. In general, in the commercial market, we've seen a lot of appreciation in value for improved properties. Multifamily properties have, gone up significantly in the last 5 or 6 years. For commercial vacant land, that trend has been a lot less. And that's because construction costs have gone up at a higher rate even than what we've seen in the commercial property values. And because of that, commercial vacant land values have been relatively stable. We've seen a little bit of an increase, and I made some adjustments, but by and large, the commercial vacant land has held pretty stable. And then it's just some of the other adjustments that some of the bigger adjustments, I guess. The site's in a downtown location. It's kind of in a prime commercial location. And I tried to find some sales that are similar to that, but that's really tough because it's, in a downtown that's fully developed. For the most part, there's very few land parcels that are vacant. But I did have a couple that I felt like were really similar to the subject in terms of location, and then several that I made an upward adjustment for. And those adjustments are kind of based on differences in rental rates when you're, right in downtown center versus a few blocks away or whatever the case may be. I made a lot of, I made several adjustments to several of the comparable sales for visibility. I kind of talked about that already, but the visibility of the subject's a really beneficial feature, could be really important if you're looking to build like a restaurant or something, commercial use. And the one other one that I really wanted to point out is the adjustment for permits. Several sales sold, what happened? Oh no. Sorry. Several of the sales sold with permits in place. And I just want to show you how I came up with the adjustment for that. So I used some comparable sales in this table here, shows them of other properties that sold that were fully permitted. We had both the sale price and we had an estimate of what it cost those property owners to get the permitting through. And looking at a percentage of what that cost was to the sale price. And based on that, I came up with an adjustment for those approved lots that we had at 10%. And that was in that table. So just going around, giving everyone a headache. So you can see that permit adjustment there. So to summarize the sales comparison approach, the properties showed an initial fairly large range of 1.7 million to almost 3.4 million per acre. Per acre. So that breaks down to about a 306,000 to 608,000 value for this 0.18 acre site. But then when you look a little closer at the valuation, 2 of those sales are pretty close to the upper end of the range, and the other 5 comparable sales reflected a pretty close range of 1.7 million to 2,070,000 per acre. And that that's a pretty good range for when you're talking about commercial vacant land that's, this small. I feel really good about that range. I feel like that's well supported, given that I have 5 sales all within that range. And since the other 2 sales were higher, I felt like it would be reasonable to conclude a value near the upper end of that range, and that's what I did. So I concluded a market value of $2,050,000 per acre, which comes in at $370,000 after rounding. I just threw this in addition in the report, and I'll mention it. The sale of the City Place lot, which occurred in 2022, that sold for $2.9 million per acre. Kind of a different parcel in that, there's a lot of history there, and it's in downtown Burlington, which is kind of a different market. I didn't want to use it as a direct comparison. I do think that it sets kind of the upper end of what we'd be looking at for value for this lot, even though they're a little hard to compare. It's a lot bigger. It's, there's a significant history there with the city and the permitting and everything. So there'd be a number of adjustments probably if I tried to use it as a direct comparable, but I do think it's a good kind of benchmark of, I don't think, a value higher than that 2.9 million per acre for the subject would make any sense based on that additional data. And then in the report, we just have the reconciliation. And if I had used, if I was doing a different property and I used a cost approach or an income approach and a sales comparison approach, there'd be different values here. And I would explain, why one approach is better than the other. In this case, the sales comparison approach is really the only applicable guide to value. And so we have that one figure, which is 370,000. Exposure and marketing time. This is just to sort of explain that value is based on a reasonable marketing time. You wouldn't want to give an appraised value and say, but it might take 10 years to find a buyer for that, right? So what are expected marketing times for commercial properties? And so I just have a little analysis of this, a little summary of some different sales, how long it took to find a buyer for those properties, and concluded an exposure time for this of around 12 months or less. Could be significantly less. Most of these sales sold in less time than that. But with kind of a unique commercial lot, I felt like I should be a little conservative.
Can I ask a clarifying question? For those parcels up above, do you know if each of those, I guess 2 questions. One, had permitting approved? And,
sorry to cut you off.
And follow-up is if those parcels also had parking on site.
That's a great question. These probably aren't really good, physical comparisons to the subject.
Okay.
This is just trying to give an understanding of how long it takes to market commercial land. And I also have some commercial properties. The marketing times, especially for commercial land, can be really tough because a lot of times they're not marketed with a broker. They're going to be an inside deal or so then it's hard for me to know how long it took to find that buyer, right? So those aren't properties that I would compare to the subject directly. I'm just looking at that last column, which is how long it took to find a buyer, and thinking about that in relation to the subject property.
Thanks for your clarification.
Yeah. Certification. This just goes in every appraisal report. It's kind of this is use path requirement. And all these bullet points you would see probably in any appraisal report. And I'm not going to go through the addendum. I'm going to touch on the. So in addition to, sorry, I'm scrolling a lot. In addition to the appraisal report, after I completed the report, Josh came back and said, in addition to the valuation of the property, could you give us an idea of what market rent would be? And as I had said earlier, the comparable rental data for vacant land is there's not a lot of it, and what is available often is like these long-term 50-year leases that were signed in like 1980 and are really hard to make relevant for today's numbers. So how I approached this was I kind of worked backwards. So I considered the value of the property, $370,000. And what would an investor need to see as rental income annually to support that figure? At the time when we were discussing this, it was going to be for a 6-year lease term, but I just really looked at what the annual rent would need to be. So to figure that out, I looked at capitalization rates. A capitalization rate is the ratio of 1 year return on net operating income to a sale price. So looking at what investors are willing to pay for an investment property based on that first year of their holding period, what they're going to see in a return. So I have some comparable capitalization rate sales. And these are just properties where I had, they sold, and I had information on what that first year net operating income was. And you just divide that net operating income by the sale price to get that capitalization rate. I don't have any capitalization rate comparables for vacant land. Vacant land that's leased is pretty rare, and on top of that, having it sell is even rare. But so these are just some investment properties, in the area, and reflect what an investor would anticipate if they're looking at any investment property, and if the subject had a lease on it, that would be a potential investment. So looking at these 6 comparable cap rates, came up with a range of 7.5 to 8.4%, and I concluded a capitalization rate of 8%. So you take the valuation, that 370,000, multiply it by that rate, 0.088%, and you get what the net operating income would need to be to support that value, and it'd be 29,600. When we talk about net operating income, that's net of all expenses. Most land leases are going to be what we call triple net, which means the landlord is not going to really have any expenses. It's all going to be paid by the tenant. Things like taxes, insurance, maintenance of the property. Usually in a land lease situation, the tenant is going to take on all of that. So there's not a lot of added expense. I did factor in 3% management fee, which is pretty typical of any investment property. You're going to have some management costs, even if you don't actually have a property manager. There's always some annual costs, your time, etc., for an owner. And then I factored in the potential for vacancy and rent loss. And usually with this type of property, that risk would be fairly low. So I use a fairly low rate of 3%. Adding back those two figures, we get an indicated potential gross income of $31,400. That's the rent that you would need annually to support that $370,000 figure.
For that last statement,
Yeah.
Why would you consider the risk low for vacancy and rent loss?
Well, for vacant land, there's usually pretty low risk, for land leases. When you have a land lease, the risk is usually very low to a landlord that you're going to have a vacancy, because the tenant of that property is going to use that land usually with an improvement. And if they vacate that property, they're going to lose rights to that improvement. So usually when we see a land lease, it's like a 50-year term or a 100-year term, and the tenant has built a building on the site. And if they can't pay rent and they vacate, the owner gets that improvement. So it's almost like a benefit if you're a landlord and you have a tenant move out when you're a landlord for vacant land.
Okay, thank you.
And that's pretty much it for me. I think we're gonna pass it off to Rosa.
Yeah, I think Rosa would be next. I just wanted to make sure, so, we have a copy of the appraisal report. Is the one on the screen, does that include Rosa's, you know?
I know, I didn't have Rosa's part of that.
Okay, so I think we would want, to include a copy with Rosa's, just review. And so, I suppose I could maybe,
Do you want to take over?
I could maybe take over.
Oops.
City manager. So would it change if parking was available to a hotel? Would that change your assessment of whether the mixed use was highest best use versus a hotel?
I would have to look into that. I would say probably not, but I guess it would depend. Factors. From different investors that I actually had a conversation recently with Doug Mann, who's building Abenaki Way. And he indicated to me that he felt like hotel development might be like it was probably really profitable a few years ago, and there's been a lot of added rooms to the market recently, and we're probably seeing more of like an equilibrium period where it might not be as profitable to continue to do hotel development. That's just one example, but I think there are. I think that the hotel market might be kind of meeting kind of a stabilization, maybe not as much. I think the costs associated with hotel development are getting really high. Maximum productive. But if that was the case and we wanted to do more research on that, do some more homework. Definitive answer.
How long would that take you?
It'd really be about probably talking to more investors and getting more information on maybe costs and things like that. It'd be hard to say.
It's something for council to consider because you might realize that we actually could offer parking now, which is different from even a year ago.
Yeah, at the time of this appraisal, we could not, but that
Right.
has changed.
Right.
I guess I'll jump in one more. I don't think that would necessarily, I mean, having access to parking was kind of outside the scope of this appraisal, but at changing what the potential use is, maybe the maximally productive highest and best use from mixed use, if a hotel was possible. I'm not sure that would, change the valuation all that much. I really think that we're still looking at properties that are offering similar utility and really well, I guess I'd have to check, but check zoning and so forth. But those other lots could have potentially also supported a hotel, right? So, and those owners didn't choose to do that. They went with multifamilies. So I don't know if all of them could. I'd have to double check zoning, but I definitely think that, that's something to consider.
Thank you. While you're teeing up for Rosa, I'd like to call a 5-minute recess for a little break. We will reconvene at 7:35. 7:35.
Okay, thank you. So I have up on the screen, this is my understanding is essentially identical to what Luke just presented. This is a copy of his report after review by Rosa Benoit at the Vermont Agency of Transportation. So just to, dot our I's, cross our T's, this has been entered into the record. We can also put into the record what Luke just presented, which again is substantively identical with just a few notations by Rosa. I think that I would just have one quick question for Luke is to just maybe, again, give his thoughts on the difference between the appraised value that you did and the currently assessed value, as well as, your explanation of, or your thoughts on the price that was paid for this parcel versus your appraised value.
Yeah, and I'll just say that I'm always looking at, what the market data is going to reflect in terms of value. So I've got 7 comparable sales that are, giving us a value range, and I feel really good about that data. The 2014 sale of this property, I don't have all of the information about that 2014 sale, but I do believe that there was some Act 250, older Act 250 permits that were still active at that time, or the owners, thought that they could keep that going, and I believe those are now expired. So that could have been an influence as to why they paid more for that, but I didn't appraise it in 2014. I'm looking at it as a 2023 valuation and what the comparable sales data is telling us, and that's, how I'm going to value it. And then the assessed value, I went over that, and, I'll just reiterate that the assessors have their own methodology for coming up with those values. And my valuation is just separate from that, and I'm not really looking at that and having that influence my opinion of value.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I think we can go to Rosa Benoit from Vermont Agency of Transportation to discuss her review of this appraisal. She's appearing remotely.
Yeah. Rosa, can you hear us?
Was what we... Oh. Was our discussion recorded though?
Everything was recorded.
Oh, okay.
Everything was live streamed.
Oh, it was muted on Zoom. Oh, okay. Okay. So I think with that, I would just ask Rosa to discuss, her review of this report and her thoughts on this appraisal and the conclusions that she arrived to as well.
Are you controlling the screen, or am
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
how do I control the exhibit?
Oh, how do you control it? I think that, I can control it from here. You could also, if you have it available to yourself, I think maybe you could be made a panelist and you could share your screen and therefore control the screen.
Okay.
Rosa, you are currently a panelist, so if you wanted to share your screen right now, you are able to do so.
Oh, okay. I don't know where it went. Sorry. It's looking at my my second monitor. Perhaps Christian, you could share the screen. It's only the last few pages of the report that I really need shared anyway.
Okay. So I've got that first page pulled up. Did you want to start at that page or towards the end?
No, you could just go to the last page. Or the last 3 pages, page 92. So I'll start by saying that appraisals that are used for federal aid projects, for transportation projects, all require a appraisal review by the Code of Federal Regulations, known as the Uniform Act. So when I received the appraisal, I reviewed the report as Luke was just described. The effective date, as you see at the top, is the date of the site visit, October 3rd. It is for the use of the agency of transportation and actually also the city of Winooski, which I mistakenly left out, to purchase this property for the temporary rights for the project. The appraisal conforms to USPAP, the Uniform Act. We also use the Yellow Book, which is the Uniform Appraisal Standards for Federal Land Acquisitions, as a guide, and the VTrans Right-of-Way Manual, Chapter 3 and Chapter 5. The purpose is to determine the reasonableness of the fee simple market value opinions in the report. And if you could scroll down to the bottom half of that page, the scope of work was I read the appraisal report. I researched and verified the data as I needed to, and analyzed it for, one, was it complete? Did it include all the information that is needed? Was it accurate? The data information in the sales comparison approach especially, was that accurate? It was all the information relevant? And then the value, was that reasonable? And I was able to answer yes to all of those questions. I thought Luke did an excellent job providing 7 comparable sales that were a highest and best use that was similar to the highest and best use he prepared for the appraisal. He described the subject property adequately and produced a reasonable opinion of value. I did not inspect the subject property or the comparable sales. I've been appraising in state for 12 years, and I've been working at VTrans for 18 years. And in that time, we've been appraising property all over the state for transportation projects. So I was familiar with the parcel and the comparable sales and the neighborhood. I do recommend the appraisal as the basis for just compensation. Just compensation is also something that the Uniform Act requires that the agency designated employee provide the amount to believe to be just compensation. And if you can go to the next page. And on this page, you'll see a summary of values. The before value was $370,000. The after acquisition value is the same because we are not acquiring any land and we're not acquiring permanent rights. We're acquiring temporary rights, and the parcel will go back to its original condition, will remain the same. So the value of those temporary rights is $188,400 per the appraisal report. And if you could go down a little further on the screen, yep, or go back up a little bit. I did receive the appraisal report before I received the market rent addendum, and I had approved the appraisal report on October. I forgot the exact date. I think it's written on the top, actually. If you could go back up. Yeah, I approved the appraisal report on October 20th, and then I received the market rent addendum, and I approved that on October 9th. And so I put both of them together as one report and approved them all on November 9th. Now, if you could scroll back down to where I was. The market rent addendum provided the market value of the subject and the annual market rent for the subject parcel for, at that time, it was a 6-year project duration because we were thinking 2024 to 2030. The calculation is 31,400 times the 6 years would be 188,400. So based on my approved appraisal and the analysis, the compensation offer as of October 3rd, 2023 is $188,400. And then after that is my certification, which is standard in all the reviews. And I signed the appraisal report at the bottom. And I do have a certified general real estate appraiser license with the state of Vermont. The one other thing I wanted to note about the date, the effective date of the appraisal report. It is typically for highway projects, the Uniform Act talks about what you're seeing on that effective date is what you're valuing. You value the property as it is as of that date. And so as of that date, it's vacant land available for development, considering permits, considering zoning, considering all of anything that would affect value. I think that's all I have. Any questions from anybody?
Rosa, I do have a question, and that's just going to the first page. So to be clear, that the that bottom right box that you correct, you added that to Luke's report. Is that right? And what does that just compensation temporary rights $188,400 mean?
It is, the just compensation has to be at least the value of the approved appraisal. It could be more than that if the review appraiser thinks that there's something additional that needs to be compensated for. They could make just compensation higher than the approved appraisal. In this case, I set it at the approved appraisal amount. I don't know of any other thing that needs to be added to it.
And so that amount would be to temporarily condemn the property through, is it through half of 2030?
Yes.
So to clarify kind of the rental rate for the 5 years?
6.
6.
Is that right, Rosa?
Yes.
Any other council questions?
Okay. I think we have really, I think it's just one other witness that we would need, who is Ravi Venkataraman, on the subject of permitting of the parcel.
Yeah, so regarding permitting as presented to you in the appraisal report, to confirm there are no active city permits on the property, and the information presented to you is correct. There have been a number of correspondences since 2016 regarding permitting, but no permits had been pulled during that time with the city for any projects on that parcel.
So in other words, the assumption in Luke's report that there's no permitting for that parcel remains correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Earlier. So there's no active permits on the parcel. This appraisal is based on like current state as is. The parcel now does have potentially access to the parking that it did not before. Is that something that could be considered with just compensation, or does like the state statute and process restrict us to the point in time of appraisal and how we evaluate what just compensation is.
No, so as a legal matter, the compensation amount to be paid, like I mentioned before, really focuses on addressing the damages to the landowner. So if something has changed since the appraisal report was done, then that should be considered in what the damages that the owner would suffer due to condemnation and should be reimbursed for.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you for that.
Can I ask a different qualifying question, and this might actually go to our previous witnesses? I recall, and I just want to make sure I'm recalling correctly, that remediation would kind of be part of the process of this land, and so it would be returned in a remediated state. Am I correct, or?
Correct. Yeah, we intend to put the land back exactly as you see it today.
Okay, and when you do, would that take into account, like the
contamination.
the current contamination before you worked on it?
Okay.
So yeah, regarding the contamination, this was something that was discussed with the finance and maintenance agreement and is addressed in the finance and maintenance agreement specific to contamination on city-owned property or property acquired for the project. So not having it in front of me, essentially we committed to working with Federal Highway to try to seek participation for dealing with the contamination. So if we are granted the access for the temporary rights on this parcel, the land will need to be disturbed and the contamination will need to be dealt with, working with DEC and handled appropriately. So there will be a cost. Per the finance and maintenance agreement, those costs would be 100% non-participating, the disposal of the soils, the city's expense. But we will, the state did commit to working with Federal Highway to try to get federal participation. Federal Highway will not commit to that until NEPA is complete for the whole project, which we're very close to. But I think regardless, we've been very proactive in doing, because the subject property has contamination, but the city-owned lot around it, which will also be disturbed and also be used for this access, it also has contamination. So it's more than just the subject property, it's that sort of quadrant. So we have done additional, we've done some additional investigation out there, and we're actually in the process of doing more of that will be reviewed by DEC and Federal Highway before we do more field work, just to try to define the nature and extent.
Gotcha.
So the goal is that we're being as proactive as we can in hopes that we can get Federal Highway to participate, but there's no guarantee.
Gotcha.
So I don't know if I went off too much there.
Yeah, I guess part of my question is when it's, say, returned to the city's land is returned to us, this potential land returned to the owner, that remediation would be done?
Yes,
Most likely.
yeah, so I think the earth that is disturbed, so there won't be like a complete site cleanup per se, of all the soil on the site. But if our contractor needs to excavate to cut an access road to get an appropriate grade, has to remove, say 10 feet down, then that soil, per the soil management plan developed with the Department of Environmental Conservation, would need to be treated appropriately, likely disposed of off-site, and then new fill would be brought in to restore the grade as it is now.
Gotcha. So it might not be complete for what might be needed for, say, a hotel, but it would be improved.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance that some of the contamination at least would be removed, and that would reduce, future liability if there is development ever on the site.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
just follow up to that, I'm sure there's no, it's too early to have any cost estimates. Okay.
Any other council questions on the issue of compensation?
Aurora, to your last question, I think this is why you were asking. So our current development agreement with Winooski Hotel Group says that we're responsible for remediation. So
Okay.
I think for this purpose, it's a
It's
wash for them.
non-issue. Okay. I appreciate that.
And I guess as a follow-up to the parking availability, that still, that may be a factor that has changed since the appraisal was done, but there are other factors that would be taken into consideration for Act 250 purposes. So while parking may be a new factor, the review for an Act 250 permit approval might take other things into consideration than was previously done. So while it did hinge on final approval previously, that may not be the only thing moving forward that is considered. We don't know.
Is Revy still on? Revy, do you have any comments?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So if an applicant chooses to apply for permits with the city in this district, that would have to be reviewed by you and by Act 250 accordingly. So every aspect of Act 250 review and the city's regulations ordinances would have to be in conformance with what they're proposing. So parking may just be one element, but there are a number of elements that are within scope with our regulations as well as Act 250.
Thank you.
We don't have anyone else here any longer. There were questions from the public. Shall we close out then this portion on the issue of compensation?
I think that we can do that. Yes, there are no more questions.
Okay. So the next step in the process would be to allow the property owner to present. We know they weren't able to attend this evening and wish to follow up at our July 14th meeting. So we can choose to close the hearing for now temporarily and reopen it at that July 14th meeting to allow them equal opportunity for presentation. At which time we would also then be able to follow up with our deliberation. Would someone like to make a motion to close this hearing temporarily to reconvene on July 14th?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Thomas, second by Charlie. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. So we will close this condemnation hearing and we will reconvene on July 14th. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that is the end of this evening's agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Second. Motion by Bryn, second by Aurora. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Motion carries and meeting adjourned.